Welcome to another edition of Driven to Lead. I'm your host, Wayne Brannon. In this program, we explore the real stories from key executives to find the leadership lessons that drove their success, whether in good times or bad. We got a great program for you today, so let's make it happen. So today we have with us David J. Johnson, President and CEO of the National Institute for Automotive Service, better known as ASE, out of Leesburg, Virginia. Dave, how are you today?
I am great, Wayne. It's a privilege and an honor to be with you this morning. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it as well. You know, like me, you've got a long storied history in automotive. I liked your comment when we spoke earlier about the fact that you started working on just about anything and everything from a very young age. I think you grew up on a farm working on tractors and other things. Tell us a little bit about that.
I did, and I look back and Wayne, I call it my life a slow motion miracle. I never could have planned what happened, and I'm sure you've probably had similar experiences growing up in the middle of nowhere, Wyoming. Um, the nearest town was population 100, little Burlington, Wyoming, and graduated from high school class of 18. And then went on to do some volunteer church work for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in New Zealand, which was a big shift for the farm kid from Wyoming. And
Yeah, yeah.
anyway, on to school, and so it was, and all through that, all I wanted to do was turn a wrench and fix cars and trucks and anything that moved, and it went a little beyond that,
Yeah,
which I'm grateful for.
I'd say so. Well, humble beginnings often create some great opportunities. And I know for a part of your career with Ford, you worked in the Asia Pacific region, right? I think you were leading the technical service ops over there.
I did. So our technical service operations for essentially for the Eastern Hemisphere, except for Europe, had that, and that was a life-changing experience and a wonderful experience. Challenging as well. I know your time in Europe, you know what that's like to go work in a different culture and adapt
Right.
and make things work.
Yeah, it was challenging in many ways and very enlightening to have an opportunity to work in different countries. I worked in South America and Africa and the Middle East and Europe, a little bit in Asia, but um, it everyone always told me that, my market's different. And of course they are. They're all different, but there's a lot of similarities. And I used to be amazed more by the similarities, at least in the car business, where, customers just want to get from point A to point B with as much value and reliability and style as they possibly can in every market. And our dealer network, is just trying to, they're just trying to make a good living for them and their families and their employees and satisfy customers. And it really wasn't that different given that we're running in most markets, like Ford, we were running a franchise dealer system.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was very interesting to me too. And I think the dealers, that's a good point. Uh, the fundamentals really were not any different when you got right down to it. And to me, dealers often reflected the personality of the company. A lot of times we might like to blame dealers for things that we didn't like or weren't going the way we thought they should. And I came to see it as that, you're pointing one finger at them, three fingers are pointing back, and usually
Absolutely.
they're a product of what we had done ourselves. And so you had to reflect on that a little bit.
Right. And then when you came back to the US, was that when you were global director of service engineering operations for Ford?
Yeah, I mean, I had a short a stint there as our aftermarket parts organization. I took that on, and that was a lot of fun, and so got more involved on the parts engineering side, plus launching a new aftermarket brand for Ford. It was called OmniCraft, which was our all makes
Hmm.
brand to go along
Right.
with the Motorcraft brand and things like that. But
Right.
yeah, then transitioned into the global lead for our technical support operations. We called it service engineering and operations at Ford,
Mhm.
but think of it as anything technical going on in the back end of
Yeah.
the store. We did it. All the technical support tools, training, warranty, recalls, all those things that went with that was kind of under my purview there, and it kept life exciting.
Yeah. I know it. I'm sure it did. So this move to ASE, I know ASE's been around since I think the early 70s, right? And it's kind of the independent kind of setting of vehicle repair proficiency and standards and certification for repair people. Tell me a little bit about ASE.
Yeah, formed back in 1972, and at that time it was the big three. So GM, Ford, and Chrysler at the time were a big part of this, and the NADA as well. And it came about because at that time, and I vaguely remember some 60-minute pieces from the 60 Minutes program that had gotten things stirred up in Washington, D.C., and they were about to bring some legislation forward to require licensure of mechanics at the time. And so the big three, NADA, got together, brought in some of the other larger chain operators at the time. Midas Muffler would have been one of the big ones at the time, said, hey, we want to get together. Let's take care of this ourselves. Government help isn't always help. And we think we can do it better. And so they started ASE as a way to certify, like you said, proficiency, skills, and knowledge of
Mhm.
technicians so that you can know that you're getting a quality repair on your vehicle, whether you're going to a dealer or the aftermarket.
Right. Right now, and when I see my son right now is looking to be an entry-level mechanic, and just about every job he looks at, they are requiring ASE certifications, so he's got to look in to see how that works and get up to speed on that. So interesting to have a
Well,
conversation with you today. So
I was gonna say, and we are happy to help them with that.
yeah,
So
great. God bless you. That'll be great. We'll do that afterwards because he's 26 and living at home, so he definitely needs some help.
I get it. I totally get
A
it.
lot of young people today are kind of in that boat. We're living in a tough world, for them to kind of carve out a standard of living, even similar to what we had from the simple beginnings we had in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, is a tough road to hoe. So I feel for all those kids.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah,
The times have changed, and I know, we'll
they really
talk
have.
about that some more. I'm sure that it is a different generation. I think people can be a little hard on the current generation, say back in my day. Well, back in my day, we didn't have many of the challenges that these young folks
Yeah,
have nowadays either. And I
absolutely.
think there's a ton of potential there that will come out, that is coming out already, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we talked a little bit about what sparked your passion, just turning wrenches early and loving it and wanted to be a part of it. Was there a defining moment as you kind of got into working for Ford or before you moved to Ford, or a big personal challenge you had to overcome to make it happen where you got into this career path that was so successful for you?
Well, well, it's interesting, Wayne, and I was determined that what I thought I wanted to do, yet I always knew I wanted to do more than just that. I thought, well, maybe I want to own a shop. I want to, do these different things. And financially didn't have the wherewithal to do that. And my dad, he had mechanicked as well as farmed, trucking company. We'd done everything.
Right.
He was a serial entrepreneur, if you will. Um, and I can't say that we were financially very successful in any of them, uh, but put food on the table and it worked. But he encouraged me to go to school, and I thought, well, I'm going to challenge myself, and went into an engineering technology program. But still, my passion was just all around the cars, and I was brought into um, as I was approaching my senior year, I was conned into interviewing the Ford Motor Company when they came to campus at the Little Weber State University in Ogden, Utah. And I didn't want to do it because I had no intention of going east. I thought of that as practically the East Coast, going to Michigan at that time. And so I interviewed there, and they invited me to come to Michigan
Right.
and interview again. And at that time, they called them assessment centers at the time. I don't remember what they
Right.
call them nowadays, but 8 hours of role play,
Yeah.
and they messed with your
Right.
mind and put you under stress. And when I was done, I'm like, there is no way I did well at this. I thought I'd failed miserably, and I would tell them to jump in a lake if they offered me a job anyway. In the
Yeah.
meantime, all these other things were going on, and the job opportunities that fell through that I thought were shoe-ins, and they
Right.
came back 3 weeks later and said, "Oh, you did great. We really want you." I'm like,
You're
"You're
the
full of
man.
it, but
Yeah.
but I need a job."
Yeah.
So lo and behold, I moved to Michigan. Moving to Michigan and doing that, one of the switches that flipped for me, Wayne, was realizing I had a decision to make. Do I just want a job
Hmm.
and live here, and
Right.
and just enjoy being in Michigan, and my life is more focused on things outside of work. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. It depends
Sure.
what you want.
Yeah.
Or knowing that I really didn't have family anywhere around. My family was 1,500 miles away, and my wife's family as well. I thought, if I'm going to be here and if this is what I'm going to do, I want to make the most of it. And so that was kind of the mindset that kicked me off. And I kept thinking 5-year plans. And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, I don't want to stay here. I still want to get back west. So I went and got my MBA at night school,
At
and
Michigan,
things
right?
like that.
University of Michigan, I think I saw on your
Yeah, yeah. So
profile.
the Dearborn campus, because that was
Yeah,
the most
sure.
convenient.
And
But
yeah,
yeah,
U of M's a great school. I mean, the business school there is renowned.
yeah. They did some good for me, and I figure
Hmm.
if they can teach me something that isn't always that teachable, it's probably a good program,
For
and it
sure.
worked out well. And so things kind of took off from there, Wayne. That
Yeah. Yeah.
and but I kind of attribute it to that switch that flipped for me, recognizing what do you want and
Hmm.
what do you want to be. And
So
it didn't
important.
unfold necessarily in the way that I thought it would, but it unfolded in better ways than I thought it would.
Yeah, that's tremendous. I mean, we're always telling young people today to follow their passion and understand really what they want to do. And it's great advice, not just when we're young, but every day of our life, to have a purpose and to have something that we need to focus on. In my leadership coaching, I work with senior executives who've done amazing things in their career, but they still need to step back sometimes and understand what really serves them, what moves them in the right direction on every aspect of their life so they can be truly fulfilled and happy and not just be fighting their way through the next day or climbing the next rung of the corporate ladder or taking on the next market challenge. Knowing what we want and why is critical. So I like the fact that that kind of shaped your early life.
But I mean, you're right on, and I'm sure with all of your experience, you've seen how that that changes over time as well.
Sure
And
it does.
and
Yeah.
you start to, as we age a little bit, I suppose, we start thinking about even those longer term things beyond your career and thinking about your family. And
Yeah.
the sooner you do that, I think the better off you are. Because like you say, if you're just focused on climbing that next rung, it's not going to bring long term satisfaction.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, what happens is you fight, you fight, you fight, and you're very goal oriented. You get one position, and you get another, and another, and another, and what happens is the fight becomes a part of who you are. The climbing of the corporate ladder itself is a part of the journey, and it becomes almost a definition for our lives. And then when you get done, or you get near the top, or where you think your top rung is, then that whole aspect of your life kind of falls away and you're there. And then what does it mean? What do you do? And it's so important to have, some deeper core values and understanding who the people are, who you're working with, and what's important. And we'll talk about a few of these
Yeah.
things today, I hope.
Well, yeah, and I just wanted to add to that and you I'm sure you observed this, because I talked about making a decision that, well, if I'm going to be here, I want to I want to do well, I want to progress, I want to make a difference in a bigger way. But you also observe those who, to your point, maybe their whole focus is just on the next rung of the ladder, and that took them so far, but often there were, unfortunately, I'll say, dead bodies in the wake, because they were more focused on that than recognizing relationships were important as well. Working with others was important. Some of those fundamental things that you learn, go back to Dale Carnegie type things that were helpful to me. That you like, I don't want to be that person, and I don't want to do it that way. And I think that's, to your point, I think that's a big factor.
Well, the whole purpose of this podcast is to find the pearls of wisdom in the real world experiences that we have. So, let's get into that. I'm sure this aspect of understanding how important it is about the relationships of how we touch other people along the way and create those relationships and have those opportunities to lift one another up, move by learning from one another, putting teams together. I mean, one of the greatest experiences of my life was putting together teams, especially ones that were high performance teams because we're all on the same page. So we'll get to some of that. So let's transition into some key stories from your life, from your career. It could either be current or from something in the past. I mean, I'm always interested in learning how, people overcome challenges, major hurdles in their life, or how they look at a market opportunity and they're creative and innovative and they go out and they capture that opportunity. There's always some pearls of wisdom in those things. So let's look at the leadership characteristics associated with some of your stories, Dave, and just, yeah, give us some background, set it up for us, and then let's chat.
Yeah, I was thinking about you and I talked prior about my experience in Asia Pacific, and what we were doing there, and that's one example. And what you said about, and I could just tell by the way you said it, your experience with developing teams and high performing teams, and that challenge and that opportunity of building the team, and it being about the team, not about you, and just that it's very fulfilling when you see that come together. And I experienced that when in several times in my life, being part of it, whether as a team member or bringing the team together. We first moved to China back in 2012, and when I got there, so that was the home base at the time for
Mhm.
Ford's Asia Pacific operations.
Right.
And what we had there was there was a China team, there was a Thailand team, there was a South Africa team, Australia. You get the idea.
Yep.
Philippines, Japan,
Yep.
Korea, and they were all doing their own things. They were all self-contained teams within their market, and so understandably, they're always trying to optimize for their market. Um, as sometimes financial pressures drive some of these things. They're like, well, we're looking for better out of this whole organization. And by the way, we need to do it with fewer people. And all of these pressures that came together. And what I saw was the opportunity was there to take all these disparate teams, bring them together. Couldn't bring them together physically, but within their own country. So this was early on in the early days of, we were still just doing audio conference calls. We thought that was pretty cool technology at the time. Video was starting to come along, but I said, what could we do together? If you have all these resources individually, and you could see there was a lot of overlap in what they did, what they're doing in the Philippines, they had to do the same thing in Australia. And so, uh, first thing I did was, convinced my boss at the time to say, I need to bring about 15 people together in a room. And I said, in Bangkok, and we're going to get together. We're not going to let anybody out of the room until we come out of there with a plan on how we're going to align ourselves. And of course, as we brought people in, everyone felt like, well, we're different. It's a great idea, Dave, but impossible because we are different. Um, the challenges I deal with in the Philippines are different versus Australia, versus Bangkok, certainly versus China. And as I looked at that, and I said, well, let's just make a list. Let's make a list of
Mhm.
all the things you do. And we start making this list, and then it's kind of a matrix list of the things they did, and then across each of the markets, and said, all right, how many of you do this? Well, of course, what we found was 80% was exactly the same in terms of what they did. And it started to turn some lights on. And then there were some other things that they were doing that were unique. But what was interesting about many of those was you started asking yourself, so why are you doing that? And often they were complaining to me individually that they were doing this thing that didn't feel core to their mission. And so as you brought that together, but you still had people just like, I feel like I'm letting go of something here. If I let go and say I think we should work together, I'm losing somehow. But through that process, and sometimes it's just making people sit together for a few days. Yes, sometimes those things we think of as wasted time of having meals together, of telling stories about their individual life experiences. Uh, those were the keys actually to getting them to break down some barriers and starting to see, well, we can work together. There are things that are common. And some of the things they're always complaining about not having enough people. We says, well, if this country can do this for all the markets, guess how many people that's freeing up in your individual markets to go do these other things. And so you get the idea, Wayne, and so actually we had one of our guys from India, he made shirts. Uh, and it said SEO uniquely the same. And everybody got a
Interesting.
chuckle out of that. And the bigger chuckle actually was, and this is where mistakes can become fun. They were like made, these shirts were made in India sizes, which
Yeah.
not exactly, they're a little on the small side. So we
Yeah.
had our guy from Australia, big guy. I mean, he was ripping the shirt, but he put
Yeah.
it
Skin
on
tight.
and
Yeah.
everybody wore it.
Good for
And it
him.
was just those things that become those mementos or those
Mhm.
leverage points that you're able to refer back to that brought a team together. We end up with this region that was run globally. It
Mhm.
worked well. It was efficient, and we delivered those market leaders experiences they've been begging for years that they couldn't do because they didn't have the people. And
Yeah.
then we did the same thing on a global basis later on when became global.
You got a lot of things I'd like to drill down on, but in the interest of time, we just focus on the one about, being a global company and yet, needing to have some autonomy and some local leadership and process. How much can you actually commonize and systematize for greater efficiency? And, I spent so many years working on these issues across many markets. And the guys from the central office operations are always well intended and they're trying to save money. They're trying to commonize processes. The problem is that they just don't understand that while they're trying to do the same thing, those similarities are there, as you and I both agree. But what happens is the processes for doing it are not as robust. They don't have as many people to do it. They don't have as many IT resources or dollars in the budget to execute it. And so, sometimes we had issues where, we had a great system, but by the time you allocate the cost of that system out to some of these smaller markets, it would
Yes.
be their entire IT budget for one system. Maybe it's a supply chain system, or maybe it's a dealership transport solution or something. But it's really critical to get people to understand that you have to scale things when you're using central systems, number one. And then the second point I'd make, it really goes to your point about getting people together to really understand each other and trust each other, because we've got to make a lot of trade-offs in understanding the business process and where the process needs to be different at a local level and where it can be the same. And what happens is local people dig in and say everything's different. It's not. You dig down, you find there's more similarities, but there are some things that you just can't change, or where a global system needs to adapt. You need to write that, incremental software change so that some systems can be accounted. Whether it's a regulatory issue, maybe it's an import duty issue, maybe it's an internal taxation issue, or whatever. But there are a lot of those, and the complexity of getting that right, and then all the emotions around it. You had your hands full with this.
Well, yeah, it's like you were there, Wayne, and you were on that, I'll say on that market side, right? So I'm almost that centralized person, but not wanting to be that centralized person because I saw how those behaviors worked and actually how it didn't work, to your point, and thinking about those systems. Case in point, we had warranty system. We were going to a global warranty system, and we had a very good, actually a good regional one in Asia Pacific that many of the markets were using, and there were a couple of stragglers there too. And so that was one of those white hot debates you were having, and part of the big challenge was, and part of comes the challenge of a global company, but helping people to recognize, and for me, it was typically on the finance side, that
Mhm.
if you're just going to go spread this like peanut butter in terms of allocating costs, you're taking markets out of the game. They will not play. And you're like, well, you may not care, but I care because operationally you are not enabling them to take advantage of common processes now that would benefit everyone. So
Right.
how do you find different ways to allocate that make it reasonable? So we went through that. We eventually did get there, but to your point, there were those with that approach of, well, there's your allocation, just deal with it. I'm like, no, you can't. I couldn't support that in good conscience. And I was trying to, I would partner with the market leaders. I'm saying, look, I'm here to support you, not to do my own thing. So how does this work? And we balance it out, and you would get there. But but you're spot on, Wayne, with the challenges that come with that and how you find that proper balance between what I thought of as, a global structure with
Yeah.
local adaptability.
Yeah. So I know I love that story. I'll bet you have some stories also, just changing the direction a little bit, just out of interest. In my experience working with sales and marketing and after sales or the service side of the business, as we call it in some places, I always found that the after sales or the service side of the business always kind of took kind of like a back seat, if not at least a seat behind the driver on this new car sales side or whatever. I bet you've never experienced anything
Yeah,
like that in your career, have you?
I love you, man. You just validated my life at Ford. And of course, you would you would joke about it, but I will tell you what I found was in and you probably found the same thing with your experience in South America, Europe, is you get into those smaller business units, they had way more, I'll say, way more respect for what that back end of the business did to that support organization on the fixed ops side. And I always viewed it as it's because you got to see the business from end to end, and so you understood the interoperability, if you will,
Sure.
of the whole business enterprise, and I call it the life cycle of the business. And I viewed us as, man, we're a key piece of this, and it was always known, but I'll say back in North America, not not internalized. And so you
Right,
were kind of
right,
the dog's hind leg, if you will. And so that, that just, and it was okay. I was like, I was never going to be, vice president, global vice president of sales for the company. That wasn't going to happen. And
right,
that wasn't what I was looking for.
right.
Cause I loved what we did. And so you're right. That's where it's not always appreciated, but usually when it is appreciated when the chips are down and something bad is happening and you need help fixing it. That was when it was appreciated the most.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely becomes paramount. And it's also true at a dealer level like that. If you look at a dealer's operations, maybe 50, 60% of their revenue comes from the vehicle sales side of the business, but 50, 60% of the profit comes from the parts and service operations in the stores.
Yeah.
So the emphasis is so critical. It's so difficult to get right. The complexity with all the part numbers that are there across all the model years, the need for special tools and training for the people is way beyond what you have on the sales side of the business, or even on the F&I side of the business, where you got a lot of partners out there who help you from the insurance companies and financing companies. So I think the complexity and the importance are just undervalued across the board. And it was interesting to see that happen. It's also true that, well, you said, I think correctly, but in humility, you were never looking to become the VP of sales. But you know what? The VP of sales could never be the VP of service, right? Because I mean, there are occasions where you got really, great people who are great leaders.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it does happen from time to time. But for the most part, the people on the sales and marketing side of the business don't understand the parts and service operations.
Yeah, it's a little different, right? And
It's
yet
difficult. It's
you
hard.
you
It's
you
hard.
you you do have that understanding as you get more exposed to the parts and service side, and then you did have a pretty good understanding of how it impacted the rest.
Mhm.
But and to your point with the dealers, I used to say, well, and with the with your company as well, and maybe this applies to anybody out there that's listening, whether you're automotive or not. You often think about that service aspect of your operation and maintenance. And of course, as you know, we always said, well, what's your service absorption, dealer?
Mhm.
And thinking about service in terms of how it was covering your fixed cost at the store level. I, I I was a little rebellious in saying, why don't we call it sales absorption and think of it as service profits? And
Mhm.
I kind of get cross-eyed looks once in a while with that. But you know what my point was,
Yeah.
it is a profit center. Don't think of it as a thing that just covers your cost
Right.
because you are automatically, emotionally, and mentally sub-optimizing your service operations instead of recognizing it can be a powerhouse for you in
Absolutely.
addition to your sales.
Yeah, and for the listeners who don't necessarily understand the idea of service absorption, it's just the extent to which you're profitability from your service and parts department can cover the fixed expenses of the entire operation. So in the
Yeah.
mindset of a lot of people, sorry for those of you who are very familiar with that, but just at a high level, it's just a mindset. If you're running a business, are you looking for the sales side of the business, selling new and used cars in this example, for example, to be covering your fixed expenses and then you can make money in the service and parts department? Or are you looking at the service and parts department to cover all of your fixed expenses so the gravy comes from the new and used car sales side? And that's usually the way it works in just about every dealership in this country and many others as well. So there's always a tug of war between the two, and it's philosophical and mindset related that has a big impact. Now, the reality is, I mean, if I was running a dealership operation today, I would be focused on the customer satisfaction and running those fixed operations as pure and as efficiently and as customer focused as I possibly could, because that's where the longevity of the dealership's coming. One of the other interesting things, Dave, is after COVID, I was just looking at some numbers the other day, the loyalty rate across the industry on new car sales, would I buy the same brand as I bought last time, have continued to slide a little bit. I think the number I saw, can't come up with the numbers on my desk here. I think it was 47% loyalty is kind of the industry standard right now, which is well below where it has been in the past for many brands. And so with people willing to switch to a greater extent, there's no more powerful tool that a dealer operator has than to provide incredibly good service, build that trust and that confidence. And to their credit, most dealers know that, and they're working hard on that. And the customer experience at the retail level has soared from where it used to be 20, 30 years ago.
I
And I think
I was going
that's
to say, yeah. And to be fair, Wayne, to your point, I over my career, that perspective certainly changed significantly,
yeah,
as
absolutely.
you mentioned. And like you say, yeah, loyalty continues to go down for various reasons, and so that, and I'm sure you preached and taught this. It's those touch points you get with those customers between the time of sale to the time of trade in.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of that's in the back end of the store. So how are we treating them? What is that experience so that they want to stick with you?
My daughter right now. She's 27. She's she's a service writer for a local luxury brand here in Naples, Florida, and she's killing it. And you know why? Because she really loves the people who come in, and no matter if they're angry or they're upset or their car's broken or whatever, she just loves on them. She treats them with respect. She does exactly what they're expecting and then some. And I mean, she's been in the business for about 6 months and she just loves it. And the store she's working for loves her, and she's putting some incredible numbers on the board. And it's just because, just like the relationships with our teams that we were talking about earlier, the relationship with a customer is so critically important. And we can all do better if we remember that those touch points, those human touch points, mutual human respect, shared responsibility, are great leadership principles, but they're also great sales and marketing principles.
That is so true. And whether you're selling vehicles or you're selling service, I shouldn't say selling service, consulting on service like your daughter does,
Yeah.
it makes all the difference in the world. That like you said, that comes through. If I generally want to help people, you can't fake that.
No, exactly. She has story after story she's telling me. It be interesting. Maybe you'll talk about it at some point. So, how do you stay current in your business? I mean, in the technical side of the business, especially with EVs coming and all of the need for completely different training for that side of the business, and yet staying current on all the ICE vehicles that are, still, in play, and the hybrid versions and plug-in hybrids. I mean, ASE must have a huge responsibility to stay current, from a technology standpoint. How do you guys do that?
Well, we do, and I'll say we haven't necessarily always been the best at this, and sometimes we've been trailing in that. Um, and but the reality of it is, and this is where we're getting better. We're exercising some new muscles, and it's like any business, because at the end of the day, it is a business. It's
Mm,
not for profit, but it's a business that supports the industry for the
right.
industry. But you can get a little focused on, well, here's the thing that works, and we've always had people coming in and getting these certifications, and yes, there's EV and there's Advanced driver assist systems is another big one that's come
Yeah,
on.
absolutely.
And you can fall asleep a little bit, honestly. And I shouldn't say fall, but you can kind of keep putting it off because
Yeah.
there's work involved in the testing business. And
Hmm.
think about testing for lawyers, doctors, dentists. That's exactly the kind of testing we do. Same kind of security. They call it high stakes testing.
Right.
So it's a
Right.
big deal, and
Yeah.
it's a big deal to develop that testing to make sure it's statistically significant and defensible from a legal standpoint. But uh, this is the great thing about our industry. We have a board that's made up of the OEMs, the aftermarket, you name it, they're all there. And often things start with the OEMs. EV is a great example. Starts with the OEMs. You know that those vehicles are going to be under warranty for a period of time, and it can be easy as from an ASE standpoint, say, well, nobody's working on these out in the aftermarket, and then the dealers kind of do their own thing. Some of them are very tied to ASE, some do their own thing, but there's not going to be that much demand for the test yet.
Yeah.
What I've realized very quickly is, hang on a minute, as soon as that's out there, we need to be going to work to develop that testing that reflects
Right.
and the certifications that reflect what's going on, because that that grace period, if you will, between OE introduction and where 80% may be going to the dealer right up front, that
Right.
time passes very quickly. And you have other people out there, including in the shops, that want the consumer to know that, hey, we're qualified to do this, and we have third party qualification and certification, and that they're able to, that they can have confidence in it.
Yeah.
So the way we do that is paying attention to the OEMs, what's coming out there. We essentially help to share that with others, and then we're working to now to get ahead of that, to say, as it's coming out, we're right there with it.
Well, it's critical, I think. I mean, with EVs as the example, the voltage and the amperage is just so
A little
significant.
different.
Yeah, this is a safety issue. It seems to me
Yeah.
ASC certification is really kind of at the forefront of protecting the technicians, as they work on these things. I mean, the manufacturers are stepping up and shouldering most of that,
They are,
but
but you
it's got to
think
be a
about,
collaboration with you. You can help in a lot of areas.
well, it does. And I'd say one thing that was I'd say missed from an industry standpoint was, there's all these hybrids that are out there. Guess what? Those are high voltage as well,
Yeah, of
those
course.
hybrid vehicles,
Yeah,
even the ones going back to the mid 2000s. And so it's
yeah,
important for them to understand and know what they're doing. And from an insurance
right,
standpoint, from a shop standpoint, it's important. So yeah, so we developed we got a series of three certifications, and like your daughter as an example, we have one that actually would be for her. That's about safe, you know, awareness and safety
yeah,
operating around those
right.
vehicles, because
Yeah,
you never know what you're going to run into, especially when you get into
mhm,
collision. Those are some big
yeah,
issues. And so
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you're spot on. It's a very important aspect of what we're doing here.
Well, we value what you're doing, and I think it's great. As we look forward a little bit, Dave, if you look back and think about it, I mean, you've had a few years, let's say 30 years or so in the professional realm, accomplished a great deal. Um, if you could give advice to your younger self at some point, I don't know whether you're just starting at Ford or just, thinking about what you're going to do in your career, what advice would you give yourself?
Uh, that's a great question, Wayne. There's probably lots of advice I could give myself, because I'm sure I made about every mistake you could. Uh, but I think one of them is, well, there's probably a couple of them, but one is to recognize that those leaders above you are just people too, and to really internalize that. We're often told, oh, he puts his pants on one leg at a time too, and yet it's sometimes hard to internalize that. And don't be afraid to talk to those that can mentor you, because guess what? Just like I was willing to talk to anybody. I'd mentor anybody, somebody brand new at the company. If they wanted to ask a question, I was happy to help. And I didn't quite see it that way when I was in their role. And so I think that's an important,
That's a good one.
I would do that differently. The
Mhm.
other thing I would say, and it probably goes back to what we were discussing a little earlier, you can't keep your integrity. Maybe I'll put it this way: be yourself. Don't try to be somebody you're not. I'm always going to be this farm kid from Wyoming, and it
Mhm.
sometimes shows up in the way I speak and some of my mannerisms, which I've tried to refine over the years. But it's also part of me, and there are good things that
Right.
come with it. Whoever you are, wherever your background is, be yourself, but also be self-aware enough to say, I want to be my better self. How do I become better? Not try to copy somebody else. Be your
Mhm.
genuine best self and try to keep improving. And I think that as I got comfortable with that, um, life became easier, and I was able to excel in ways that I didn't think I could because I thought I wasn't necessarily saying things or doing things exactly the right way.
Right.
Those are important things to pay attention to, but don't run away from who you are. Be you, and then put your energy into being your better self.
Yeah, that's such great advice. I think we've talked about a number of things today, David, that were interesting. I wasn't expecting we'd get into the market differences and market similarities, from a global standpoint, but I'm glad we did because I think the way you talked about it, where we need to understand who those people are and what their needs are, and how, as a global enterprise, or let's say a macro enterprise with some smaller operations or divisions, even if it's in the same country, really understanding what their needs are, respecting their points of view, and then helping guide them where you can commonize things and find efficiencies versus where you need to accommodate some of the special conditions that exist. I think those are great leadership insights. It's about listening and it's about trust to a great extent and building relationships. So I admire you for that. And I also think in the area of relationships, the idea of that process and trust, you really related it back to what you would give the advice as your younger self is to be genuine and be honest and be sincere, authentic, right? I think that's critical. And, in my executive coaching, work, what I find is that the people who really want to examine their path and find those areas where they can continuously improve are the ones who make great leaders. And so I admire you that that's what you would focus on, giving advice to your younger self to be that authentic leader, learning and growing and finding ways that you can create the highest expression of yourself. And we don't have to be 20 to do that. We can be 60 or
That's
more
right.
and do that as well every day, right?
I'm still working on that myself,
Me too.
and it's such a great point, Wayne, and
Yeah.
that's some good stuff you're doing out there because and it starts with that willingness of that individual to say, I, I don't know it all. I want to keep improving myself, and having that third party reflection, like I'm sure you help to provide, is huge in itself. It's hard to open yourself up. I get it. It's hard to open yourself up to say, okay, I don't.
Mm.
Sometimes we know our weaknesses so well, we just want to don't, but we don't want to
Yeah,
talk about them.
we don't want to
But
highlight
your
it.
ability to recognize that, to evaluate yourself, that right there puts you on the path to change.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And the first step on that road is just being more self-aware. Willing to be more self-aware might be the first step, and then becoming more self-aware, because that takes a little bit of work. And then understanding what a better path would be. In other words, being intentional. There's a lot of great leadership books on being more intentional leaders, and I think they're all fantastic. But what I try to do is just make it really easy and really practical, something to integrate into day-to-day life. How can we pre-design a better behavior that serves us? And then you evaluate everything you do. Is this moving me toward where I want to be or away from it? Does it serve me or not? And then have pre-designed patterns of behavior that you can insert when you realize you're starting to get off track. And I find that really builds a journey where we all become a little bit better, and that continuous improvement idea, right?
And that's a huge difference, Wayne, with what you're doing, because, like I say, there are a lot of great leadership books out there. That's great.
Yeah, I love them. Yeah,
Go read them, right?
yeah,
I will always say, I know I'm old, but I
yeah,
made my kids do this too. You go read Dale Carnegie if you want to talk about the foundational principles of
right.
how you treat people, and a lot of good things come out of that. And yes, and and Seven Habits and those things. There's some real foundational things. All these other good leadership works that are out there. But to your point, what you bring to the table with your ability to take a practical approach and say, how do I incorporate this into my daily busy life? Because we don't all have time to sit there and read leadership books all day long. We got to work too. And so how do you incorporate those elements into my life and in natural ways? And that's where it really adds value. So I think that's great stuff you're doing.
Well, Dave, it seems like you and I could probably talk for hours and hours about a lot of stuff, but we're going to end it there. And I just want to say how much I really, truly appreciate you coming on Driven to Lead today. I think this conversation will be one that people might want to listen to a few times because I think there's a lot of insights and a lot of learning there. I know I'll watch it again myself and tease out some of the things we discussed. So thank you very much for being with us.
Wayne, thank you so much. It's been a great opportunity. Appreciate it.
Well, that's it for today. Thanks for being with us. If you like our conversations, please feel free to hit the subscribe and like buttons. And if you'd like to make comments, ask questions, or even explore being a guest on this program, you can reach out to us via email. It's wayne@greatroad.com. That's WAYNE at GR8 ROAD.com. And until next time, always remember, the high road leads to a better place.